This is CEC lecture series, and this is called the English novel. Already we have covered a large number of authors and texts, and today we discuss Jane Austen's very famous novel Pride and Prejudice. This novel is there in the courses of most of the universities at the BA and MA level, and it is also a very popular novel. Imagine the novel was written in the early 19th century, which means that it is 200 years before the novel was written, and the author is Jane Austen, a woman. And in those days, women would not be encouraged to write anything, and least the novels, because people thought, and it was a prejudice, people thought that women do not have any exposure to life, and therefore if they write tales, if they write stories, then they will be unreal. Jane Austen broke this particular idea, particular myth about women, and she wrote this and many other novels. The novel is so popular, so very humorous, so very entertaining, that there have been people in the 19th century, and some of them in the top positions, who would have read this novel 16, 17 times. I particularly refer to Walter Raleigh, who said that he read it again and again in his life. Whenever he felt a bit depressed, a bit sad, then he will pick up a copy of this novel and would start reading it. What is there in this novel that is so entertaining? Now, entertaining is a different kind of a word today, but in the 19th century, anything that made you laugh, made you think about words in an amusing manner, and tickled your imagination, was supposed to be entertaining. And it was indeed very difficult for a writer to use language in such a manner that people will first start smiling and then they laugh. So Pride and Prejudice is that kind of a novel. Its famous first sentence is very, I'll just talk about it when I start discussing this, but let me tell you in the beginning a few things about the writer, her life, the kind of culture she breathed in, and the kind of culture that she confronted. Now, she was born in 1775, which means 25 years before the end of the 18th century, and she was an exact contemporary of Wordsworth and Coleridge. We already had lectures on Wordsworth and Coleridge on the other series, and you know that both of them were great romantic poets, and they are equally famous today. But then a woman in their midst choosing prose as a medium of expression was indeed interesting. And she was 25 when the century turned into the 19th century. She died in 1817, and we can, if we just look at it cursorily, we would say that she died when she was 42 years, but actually she was 41 years, because 1775 she is born in December, and when she dies in July 1817. So she is 41 years, less than 41 years when she dies. Why do I refer to this particular fact of the age? I say this because many of the women writers in England who wrote in the 19th century died very young, and there were other reasons, but one reason would be disease, and some infection would be caught and then they would die. And in many of the women writers in the 19th century also were unmarried. So imagine a woman being unmarried till her death, and she dies at the age of 41. So that raises a large number of questions, and particularly when the novel that she writes, this one that we'll be studying, is about love and marriage. So which means that she is a contemporary of the romantic poets. She is also aware about the major happenings, if not in the world, at least in Europe. And 1775, she wouldn't remember anything of that. She is born then. But then when French Revolution occurs in 1779, she would be 14 years. And 14 years was a big age in those days. It wasn't childhood, it wasn't even adolescent for them. They became very mature at that point of time, because education was rarely seen among the masses, and she belonged to a middle class family, and she could get education at home, and then that education would reflect in her ideas, and she would mature very soon. So when French Revolution occurs, she is 14 years, and this is also the time, I'll refer to it in the next part. This is also the time when she starts writing. At the age of 12, at the age of 13, at the age of 14, she starts writing. And writing means that she is playing with words, she is picking up words, she is using them creatively, and through that she is able to express her intent, at least approximately, if not exactly. Now, before I go into that question, which I started with, let me give you this important information that in her lifetime, 4 novels were published. She wrote many more, and many of them remain unpublished perhaps even today. But then overall we see only 6 novels in her name, and 4 of them were published in her lifetime. This is important. Sense and Sensibility is the first one. Pride and Prejudice, the second one that we will be discussing, that is 1813. Mansfield Park is 1814, and Emma is 1815. Think of the first 2 titles. They both refer to certain words which raise questions of thought. What does sense mean? How are sense and sensibility together? Is there a difference, or they are synonymous words? You start thinking, because when you start reading a novel, then the first thing that attracts your attention is the title. The second one is clearer than the first, because sense and sensibility is very difficult to distinguish the 2 words. But in the case of Pride and Prejudice, you would say, well, there is pride. People think of themselves very high, and they look down upon others, and that gives them a sense of pride. Prejudice is a difficult word, but because you are all students of literature, you would understand it quite well. Prejudice means before meeting a person, before thinking about a thing, you have formed an opinion. And when you meet that person, or when you think about that particular incident against which you are prejudiced, then you start applying your prejudice, your earlier understanding, with the actual thing that is in front of you. So in a way, prejudice is something that is a kind of color by which your eyes, your vision, your understanding are colored, and it's very wrong to have a prejudice, because then you can't think fresh. So these are problems that she is perhaps going to discuss as you start reading the novel. You would think, and there will be people who are proud, and there will be others who are prejudiced, and how prejudice affects affects my, for instance, judgment as a reader. All that will be gone into as you read the novel. Mansfield Park is the name of a place, and it's not difficult to imagine that she would be talking about some estate. So some wide, broad tract of land where families come, they enjoy themselves. There are houses, there are roads inside, private roads, there are parks, and the whole thing, the entire, even a village can be called a park, because people live there, and people live there for a long time. Emma is the only novel here, which is named after a character. So you see that three novels are of a different nature in terms of the title, but the 4th is about the character Emma. So these are the 4 novels, and I already tell you that 1811, 1813, 1814, 1815, and when she is publishing her first novel, then she is 36 years old when she published the last one here. After that, she would not see the publication of other novels. Then she is 40 years, exact 40 years. So which means that the span here is 4 years. Now we go further than this and say that yes, first the 2 other novels which came immediately after her death, they are Persuasion and Northanger Abbey. Once again, persuasion is a loaded word. You persuade somebody to accept one opinion in preference to another, and when your persuasive powers are at that point of time tested. Northanger Abbey is a name, and that is a place, and it is a historical novel. So unlike other novels, there is a novel called Northanger Abbey, and this is given in the title. I say her fiction is placed in the category the novel of manner or manners. So mostly in the 18th century, people will talk about manners, how people should think, how they should behave in the company of others, when they go to the parties, what manner of behavior they assume. All that is called novel of manners, which means that in this kind of a novel, the characters will appear in front of you in different shades, and the reader is given a chance to peep into their manners, peep into their understanding that is connected with their manners, and then you start thinking about your own life. So novel of manner is actually very educative. You read something, you read about a character who is placed in a situation, and immediately you say, suppose I were in that situation, and then you become interested about the character, and then you start comparing the behavior of that character with your own behavior in your imagination. So that is called the novel of manners, and this novel of manners actually is the byproduct of middle class life. In the middle class, you always think about your behavior, whether you are wrong or right, whether you impress others or not, whether you are able to take revenge from others or not. So in all the situations, you are either critical or self-critical, and if you are critical and self-critical, then your individuality learns a lot about how to develop further, how to grow up in terms of morals, in terms of impressions, in terms of understanding life as you see it, and compare it with the understanding that was there yesterday. So all that is there, and I would suggest that most of us should read at least 2 or 3 novels of manners written in the 19th century, because then you would be able to know, I would be able to know, for instance, whether I have gone wrong in the same situations that I faced in life. Jane Austen was the 7th child in a family of 8 children, 6 boys and 2 girls. Is that important? Yes. She was a protected child, and people would also be indulgent towards her. They would give a lot of affection, love to her, because she is the 7th child after 6 children, and she will also be a darling of the parents. So that in that kind of atmosphere she grew up. Elder sister Cassandra and Jane did not marry. So elder sister would actually live beyond Jane Austen, our author, but both these women at that point of time were not able to marry. Not that they were not good looking, not that they were not impressive in their manners, but that maybe they wanted to have a life on their terms. Maybe they wanted to marry a person of their liking, and that person didn't understand their affections, and being women of the 18th and 19th centuries, they would not be as vocal as they might be later in history. So anyway, the point is that if they have not married, then they must at least be thinking about the idea of marriage, which was a kind of compulsion in those days. I'll come to that when I discuss the novel. All received education. I think this is wrongly written here. All received education and enjoyed reading and discussing, that being a stimulating experience. I think that's a good thing to do. If we are educated and if we read, and after that we discuss with others, then that enhances our understanding and makes us more enlightened about the life that we live. And the experience is stimulating. Stimulating means that you will be thinking more and more about it, and you will be excited when you discuss, read, and as you know, when you are caught in a discussion, then either you are angry or you are happy or you are laughing. All the time, you are enjoying it. So this is the kind of atmosphere in which she lived. Jane began writing in 1787. This is to be noted. She is 12 years and she starts writing. How many of us at the age of 12 start writing? In the schools, yes. If you are if you are 12 years in the school, then you would be in the 4th or 5th standard. And in the classes, the teachers always give you some task, about writing. So that kind of writing, but they didn't go to a school. They remained at home, but they wrote something, and that writing was not done under the instructions of a teacher, but in the atmosphere of children getting together, sitting together, writing, and sharing that writing with others. All that happened in the case of Jane Austen when she was 12 years. And imagine what she wrote. She wrote plays, verses, short novels. Now, verses and short novels are slightly easier than writing plays, because when you write plays, then you make characters talk. And for a young child of 12 years, it is not easy to make other people talk in their own interests. Now, when you make a character talk on the stage or on the page, then you don't give your opinion. In fact, you make people disagree so that the discussion becomes interesting. And she started with plays, verses. Verses are confessional generally. This is what I feel. I don't want to express it as my feelings directly, and therefore I write verses. Short novels, you are interested in weaving a story, and when you weave a story, then you describe, you use dialogues, you also make statements. Those statements can be direct statements, or they can be statements that are bland in nature and you want to merely inform. She parodied the notable genres of sentimental novel and sentimental comedy. Now this is significant, that she parodies. She does not write seriously about these things. She does not take them seriously, and she parodies them. She mimics them, and through mimic she is able to entertain our siblings, our brothers and sisters at home. And if she is parodying sentimentality in comedy or in the novel, then it's a very developed mind, because most children are sentimental. In fact, most individuals are sentimental unless they start thinking and they become critical. And if she is emphasizing the importance of criticism, of critical awareness, of thought, of analysis, and attack or at least reject sentimental comedy and sentimental novel, then it's a very different kind of, it's of a higher standard of writing. She wrote a short epistolary novel, Lady Susan, in 1793-94. At 1973, she is 18 years, and 94 she is 19 years. So at that stage, writing an epistolary novel. What is an epistolary novel? A novel which contains letters. So somebody is writing letters to another person, and you are pouring out your heart to another person in letters. So one has to capture not one's own train of ideas or one's own stream of ideas, but one has to capture through a series of letters another person's psychology. So that kind of it's a difficult novel. This kind of novel is difficult. There are examples of this in the 18th century itself, and she was writing in the last decade of the 19th century, of the 18th century. So maybe she was taking inspiration from writers like Richardson, who used epistles, letters. But then for a woman of 18 years or 19 years to attempt a novel of that kind is really, it shows some kind of a courage on her part. The first version of Pride and Prejudice was written in 1798 when she was 23 years. This is interesting. The novel is published in 1813, but then before that there was a version, there was a draft that she had prepared of this novel, Pride and Prejudice, in 1798-99. Now, one important thing with respect to women writers at that time, they wrote actually, or they published anonymously. So people would not know that it was a woman who was writing, and it would just appear in a magazine or in a book form, and people would just read because they want to know an interesting story. So they pick up these stories and they start reading them, and then if they enjoy, then they can also review them, but they don't know the name of the author. And Walter Scott, perhaps arguably one of the best historical novel writers of historical novels, he is one of the best in the world, at least in the European world. And Walter Scott, picked up her book, and he reviewed it. It was Emma, I believe, and then he said that it's a nameless author, and it's a modern novel. So Walter Scott was writing historical novels, and he called this writer or Jane Austen as a writer of the modern novel. So which means that it was not the same kind of a novel that Walter Scott himself wrote. So that distinction also goes to Jane Austen, that she wrote modern novel in the sense, that she was grappling with the problems of her own time, and since her knowledge was limited in the technical sense, she would not move out of her village, move out of her home, or would not visit London either at all or only occasionally. So what would she write? I mean, to make her writings that can be called modern novel. So these are the questions that we have to think about as we discuss, as we read this novel for a course. Then Pride and Prejudice, we come to the novel. Now we raise questions about this novel. So first point that I make is romantic novel of manners. Of course, we have discussed it. It's a novel about manners. There are characters who move around, who talk, who address one another, who excite others' imagination, excite others' minds, and then their movements are also studied by the onlookers, and so which they have to impress people with their manners, how they walk, how they talk, how they conduct a conversation, how they disagree, how they agree, and whether through this kind of a mixing up they establish certain relations. They might fall in love, they might marry, and then in marriage and in love, how they conduct themselves. So all these things are very interesting from the woman's point of view. So this novel can be called a novel of manners. The second point is, in the obvious sense, it revolves around the themes of love and marriage, ending in a comic resolution. Very simple. It's a novel about love and marriage, and finally the marriage will become successful. The characters will marry successfully. But then I'm not using the word marriage. I'm using the word a comic resolution. So what is a comic resolution? You have to think about this word itself. Comic means positive, that the ending is always good, the successful, that is a comic resolution. But then, which means that initially it was not possible, it became a problem, and then it was resolved. This is the idea that I'm saying, that when one falls in love and then one is not able to express it properly, then there can be problems in the relationship, and one may not be able to marry at all. And we also have, I have already given the background now to this, that the author was not able to marry. So there are always problems when marriage situation confronts you. But then in this novel, finally, the people, the involved characters, they marry. Does the novel have a historical context? My answer is no and yes. No, because he is not talking about the place, about the life in the 18th century, the 17th century, and historical novel was and a novel with a historical context was a popular point. All writers observed it, but in that sense, this novel is not historical. It doesn't refer to history at all. It doesn't refer to any specific incident at that point of time. So that's my answer, that it's not a historical context novel. Second answer is yes, it's a historical context novel. What do I mean? Think about it. You see, you can, when you read this novel, you can relate to certain things which are suggested in the novel. They are not there. For instance, this is a period of turmoil in English history, starting from 1775 itself, when American War of Independence occurred, and English life was affected. Then in the French Revolution, France is only a few miles away from England, and there a whole revolution happened, and England must have been affected by the political ideas, the social ideas of working behind the French Revolution, and therefore that situation might have been reflected in this novel. Why do I say this? When there is no reference to the Napoleonic Wars continued for a long time, and English people were all the time worried about Napoleon's successes, and they were following him very clearly. And when other writers write about their life, then they bring in the questions of French Revolution. I referred to Coleridge and Wordsworth, and in particular Wordsworth in fact took part in the French Revolution, being an Englishman. He went there and he took part in that. But then that thing is indirectly reflected in this novel, because in the village that she presents in the novel, you have the company of certain girls with military officers, the army officers, and where have the army officers come in the village? So that's the question you can ask yourself, and then you realize that it means that there is an indirect reference to the wars taken up by the King Napoleon, the dictator Napoleon at that time, and that now literature would be affected by it. So the answer is yes, it's not historical context, and then there is a historical context, because people can be seen having in mind the situations that existed at the time. So this is the kind of understanding that we have about this novel, and this will help us understand the plot of the novel that can be discussed later. But then, so far as the points we have discussed today relate to this author and her upbringing, her making as a writer, and affecting her expression, and these points can straight away be taken up when we discuss either Pride and Prejudice, which we will, or other novels that you might discuss at some stage in your life. Thank you.